we are going. All right, we are live on Facebook, and the Zoom room is open. I'm here with, as you can see, a bunch of my friends, getting a little bit of help from my friends, and I'm here with the esteemed Warlock himself, Mr. William Charnock. I mean, that was wow, that was amazing.
Well, it was all about you, Joe, so it was fine.
It wasn't meant to be.
No, it wasn't. It was wonderful.
What do you think, guys?
That was my favorite show out of the 3 months that I've been watching. That was fantastic, William. That was just, yeah. No, I just blew my mind. The whole thing. I mean, yeah. It's just, I study philosophy. I study spirituality. Everything you got into was just so deep and cool, and you have such a wonderful, vibrant way of sharing it, and it was just fantastic. The whole thing was fantastic. Thank you.
You know, it's been a weird part of a path for me. I mean, I was brought up atheist and still consider myself probably, but one of the things about these early texts is that they didn't make a division between the sort of, and again, I tend to use the word metaphysical, different people choose. I had got so into the intangible and the non-rational parts of branding, marketing, all the stuff that I do. It was such an easy leap into sort of magical forces and magical energies. And in many ways, I actually think sometimes we just create intangible value, intangible differences, creating these intangibles takes you immediately into sort of some of the areas of spirituality or stuff that we don't fully really understand. So it was an unexpected path for me. It wasn't something I was looking for, but it's, I mean, both Carl Jung, again, alchemy, Kabbalah, all sorts of very, very early texts on religion, pre-categorization, pre-canonization of the Bible, and seeing these connections with human psychology and human behavior, and not just psychology or behavior, but also spirituality, for want of a better word. I can't think of a better word for it. The stuff we don't know about, but there's clearly something there. And just because we don't know about it doesn't mean it's not there. And recognizing that some of those forces play in advertising, some of those forces play in when you show a celebrity that uses a product, why do people then think that product is better? It's got a sense of magic around it. If Elvis wore the jacket, does it feel differently from a jacket? Like that stuff we're hardwired for, and yet we ignore it. And so for me, it's part of my whole work in marketing and branding, but it's sort of just taken over another life. It's sort of become a thing in its own right. And then you throw morality in there, and it all gets incredibly interesting.
For me, it was great about it because we've actually used archetypes as part of the HMS Beagle, part of our process, and it's just been amazing. And I have to say, I was a little not skeptical, but it almost seemed a little bit too at the beginning, because I hadn't actually studied it, and I haven't been a practitioner, at least not in the agency world, for a long. I mean, I left in 2002, but it's amazing also how what we did is we hacked it a little bit. So we took the 12 archetypes, but what we always do is we combine them.
Yeah.
So for example, we'll take the caregiver and the hero, and we'll call it the quarterback, or so like for us, what it does is it allows us to be even more creative and form connections. And funnily enough, now I see it, it's like the two cards, like the pairs work nicely together, and sometimes it's just too almost oversimplified to say the outlaw, the hero, the explorer, the jester, the lover, the ruler.
Yeah, Joe, I did the same. I was so fed up with meeting brands and clients who were like, oh, we're the everyman, or we're the the magician. Everyone wants to be the frigging magician at the moment. And I did the same. I felt the pairings together. But again, most of them were born from Jung's collective consciousness. They were born on narratives. Some of them are really, like the hermit, the wise man. It's really hard to turn into behavior. And so some of them work. I think magician works in some ways because it's a transformative mindset. But I had been pairing, and that's why the deck of cards, behavioral archetypes, are based on 6 core principles of human behavior paired together to create 36. 6 sixes are 36. 36 pairs is the archetypal framework of the behavioral set of cards that I did. What's interesting is in these early 2nd century texts, they believed in syzygies, that these energies and forces in the universe, as God created the universe, he created things like nous and aletheia, mind and truth. Inner, everything you can conceive; outer, everything that exists that you've still got to discover. And so they were paired together as well. There's what, to your thing at the beginning, perfect, imperfect, they paired them together in ways that with everything that's perfect comes imperfection. With everything that is light comes dark. With everything that is love comes hate. And so there's this pairing is actually quite a powerful tool, and it creates those tensions that actually I think make the most interesting brands, is when you create the tension and you create them together. Yeah, this is.
I'm just showing for people that aren't familiar with these 12 archetypes and how they're typically used and have been used quite effectively. And then of course there's, I'm sure until the cows have come home, you've told the story or people tell you the story of Star Wars and how when people realize, it's like a truth, right? When they realize how every major character in Star Wars is based on one of these archetypes. And it creates just, a very, very clear segmentation, if you will.
Well, actually, Joseph, thanks for bringing that up. I was going to ask you this question separately, but did you ever study Joseph Campbell in this aspect? Yeah, because to me, he's one of my heroes, and him sitting down with George Lucas and going through that whole piece of the hero's journey, and how every single character was adopted to an archetype. I mean, it was just, Joseph Campbell is maybe one of my favorite philosophers that way. He's just a genius.
A fantastic man. I mean, definitely. I guess the thing, and look, I spent 20 years working on storytelling and advertising and creating stories, and I love the story. I've come to believe that actually there's also another aspect in play, which is the system within which the story exists, and the system is constantly changing. And so a lot of my brand work moved from just telling the narrative of the story, just bringing the characters, bringing the personality, bringing that, to actually trying to change the systems that cause the story, so the underlying pieces. And so when I'm working with a client, I'm often working with them not on the comms, but on what do you actually do in your behavior? What do you actually, not just what you say, but are you actually creating an interesting narrative in your operations, in your technology? And really getting below the narrative so that you can then help them tell that story well, but you've got to have a good foundation. So for me, that was why I pushed down into this underlying, like what's underneath this. So a lot of my work was creating belief systems for brands that then would manifest behaviors, that would then manifest narratives that were actually interesting. So I didn't have to spin the story anymore. I could actually just tell an interesting story because it was interesting. And so I love the storytelling part, especially of Joseph Campbell, the hero story. But there's also a piece of story which is you've got to, as a business or a brand or as a person, you've got to be doing it. It's not just about, oh, telling everyone I'm now the hero or I'm now the magician, or dressing like the hero and dressing like the magician, but being like the fool underneath. You've got to actually live it and be it, as well as tell the narrative around it. So that's sort of how my brand work evolved. I decided that the story was yes.
Wait, let me make him spotlight. All right, do so.
Exactly.
That's
awesome. So I actually started saying, look, the story's fantastic, and I'm all about story, but you know what? The system is the story. If you create the right system, and again, coming back to changing poverty or dealing with systemic racism in America, it's not just about how you wrap the story. It's actually how do we create the systems that will actually fundamentally change what's going on, and why some people get more money than others, why certain people get treated differently. Like we have to, I mean, sorry to get heavy, but it's like we have to look at the underlying systems and change those systems.
That's why they call it systemic.
And that's harder than telling a different story. That's way harder. A lot of stuff we've learned about poverty is that you've got to create not just the innovation, but also the support network, all the other pieces. That you can't just address racism or poverty. You have to address education. You have to address all the other pieces that come together. So Joe, to your reading that piece of, you can't just look at one bit of it. You've got to look at all the other pieces. Is very fundamental to me.
And how they're interconnected, but also there's cause effect. There's you know, they are inextricably connected, but also they kind of, I guess, play into other ecosystems or other systems. You know, I was thinking to myself, I didn't actually show this to you in the in the interview, but I love the fact that your Twitter bio is William the Liar, and I actually think that your transformation is complete. You know, the cleanly shaven planning director in advertising, William the Liar, now has become the Warlock. You know, the bearded truth teller that is the Warlock Charnock. Forget Charnock, it's more like Warlock. It's unbelievable. I mean,
I was William the Liar because I worked in advertising.
I didn't have to guess. It's great. If it sticks with you, that's the problem. Now you got to be like, well, I want to be William the Truth Teller, but A, it's too many characters, and B, someone has it, and C, I'd have to start, you know, all over again. Damn, you know.
But Joe, I am both. I am liar and truth teller, and we all are.
We all are.
No doubt. It's the pairs as well. It's the pairs. Well, I said to you before, and I mean, what I love, so it's exactly what we said before, which is like, where's it going to go and where's it going to head? And we never spoke about the things we thought we might, and we walked backwards. And but I was very serious about, I mean, you know, getting to see if Jacqueline will come in, or a couple of people, because I mean, what you do, and this topic is way too important right now to, you know, just be able to devote 5 minutes or at the back end of a very cool conversation. So I would, you know,
anyway, I do want, if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to.
Well, wait, my problem is, I know once Jan starts, we're in big trouble, because I can, yeah, I can see when the wheels are spinning.
Alan Watts, nice pull.
Yeah, I think maybe I'm just going to keep him on mute. In fact, the new format of the Zoom after shows, everybody stays on mute. This is much better for me. So if Seth wants to talk, he just shows, you know, he just puts something on the screen. You know, Jan, I feel like you're almost like that. Remember there was that movie, The Dream Team? He only spoke in television shows or commercials. One of the members of the Dream Team, that movie with Michael Keaton. You can only talk in books. So you have to show a book. That's the only way that you can, our little motley crew. I'm just kidding.
No, I first of all, thank you.
Hold on. Show it to Wade.
Okay.
Show it to us.
There you go. Yeah.
Just happened to be the book I had here.
You know, something ironic about saying William the liar is that in saying that you are telling the truth. And so the liar doesn't actually ever admit that he's lying. And so he can't tell the truth.
Mm.
And that's the kind of conundrum of marketing and doing, you know, marketing and system. You know, I was talking to a prospect who's in the investor field, and I attended their webinars the last week to see what they were talking about given the situation. And it's as if there's no pandemic. Of course, they address it in some way, but it's just straight into, here's how you can make money. And here's what you want to be doing to protect yourself, et cetera, without any kind of pause for, as an industry, as a leader in the industry, where are you at right now spiritually?
Yeah.
To offer that would be being vulnerable to a degree that they can't bring themselves to. And I have a feeling that I wouldn't get anywhere if I offered this opinion to them, and or played the cards for them. I have to do that myself.
Yeah, I hesitated for a long time doing the cards. I helped Pepsi develop the Life Water brand, and we use the cards for that. I've used them for Chubb Insurance. When Ace bought Chubb, we had to bring those two brands together. We used the cards for that. I've gone in with Evan Greenberg, and we've talked about these archetypes, who was the CEO, and I was pretty nervous of going into a conversation at that level. There's something disarming about it. There's definitely an immediate uncertainty from everyone. And I don't do it to everyone. I have to get them to a point of comfort. What's your background? I mean, what do you do? What's your
well, background is semiotics and writing, and over the past couple of decades, branding and marketing, foundationally as a writer, but strategic positioner. So I'll listen, and then I'll offer that I hear what you're saying about the business you think you're in, but I think what I'm hearing from your customers and from your employees is that this is the business you're in. It's something different. Yeah. And help them to see that they could be telling their story, and you don't have to use the word story, but they could be.
I love story. Yeah.
I agree. They could be telling their story in a way that's more compelling. Yeah. But here's the warning. If you think that it's marketing, then it will fail. If you think that the goal is to succeed, it will fail. You know, it's a conundrum that you only can have that discussion about with somebody who's willing to go there. Otherwise, you're kind of accepting it for the money. Yeah. It's funny.
I had a fantastic, it's funny you talk about like listening and hearing and helping them see. Jacqueline Novogratz, who's my CEO, we've been doing her book tour, and she did a session with this guy we've worked with for a long time. He was one of our fellows and an investee. He comes from the scavenger caste in India, which is the lowest of the low, and the people who basically clear up people's shit and therefore are untouchable. He was talking about coronavirus and what we should all learn, and also what's going on in America with Black Lives Matter. And he said something just really struck me. He said, you know, we all talk about listening to each other, but listening, he said, listening needs patience. Listening isn't just about hearing the words, it's about actually digesting the words and actually bringing it within yourself and then changing yourself because of what you have heard. And he just said, he said, because of that, listening can take a year. And listening to what people say and then trying to just quickly move on to persuade them of what you were already going to tell them anyway isn't listening. And I just thought it was so helpful for me. And when we're working in places where you do have to have empathy and not just hear what they're saying, but really listen and adjust your frame based on what you're hearing from people in poverty who no one has ever listened to, people who really hesitate to tell you, but when they do tell you, you've got to really be ready to hear what they've got to say and digest it and understand it. Anyway, I just love the idea that listening is a process that can take time and takes time to actually affect your perception and your behavior. I just found it fascinating.
I love that because it says that your reading is really more about listening.
Yeah. And it's also listening with a sort of active adoption of what you've heard. That the listening is a physical thing. It's not just an oral, it's not just hearing. You listen almost with your whole body in that you manifest what you've heard in behavior, in action, in stuff. And anyway, it made me think like my brand stuff. I did a lot of discovery processes and a load of strategies where you listen to everybody, you hear what you say, and like in 24 hours, you have to amalgamate it and come back with a suggestion. And sometimes that's, you haven't really listened. You've just found the argument around it. And I do wonder, could we ever just sort of like take a little bit of time, not just to hear what has been said, but also with the people who should be listening actively to make sure they understand and have thought through what that means for them. Anyway, when you mentioned listening that way, it reminded me of that.
No, but it's true. You know, a big common thread and common theme over the last 3 months. And, you know, William, you've watched a few shows like on Facebook, but most, you know, Jan and Joey and Bob in particular have been pretty much a part of this in the after show almost on a daily basis. And as I often say, to the point where when one of them can't make it, they send like an apology, like, you know, sorry, I can't make it today. I'm like, this isn't a meeting, you know, I'm not taking attendance, actually I am. But a lot of the themes are being reinforced. This idea of embrace, love, respect the silence and the power of listening. And for me, a big part of this came from actually my wife very early in the process said to me, you know, your questions are too long and you're not listening and you're interrupting your guests. And, you know, I mean, she didn't say it like that. It sounds like, I was like, is there anything you like about the show? No, but I got to be careful. This is live on Facebook right now. But she was completely right about everything. And so what I started to do was because here's the problem, and I think we all know this, but I'll state it anyway, which is so many people are just thinking about the question that they want to ask next. They're not listening. When someone's talking and you're like, well, what's the question I'm going to ask next? Well, how do you know what you're going to ask next when you actually haven't heard what they're saying? You know, and that's why what's happened now to the show is that the show can go in many different directions, because the last thing you say might be something that just triggers off something that is so much more interesting than the questions that I typed down in advance, which I don't do anymore.
I don't know if you guys have heard this, but someone once said that hearing is letting it happen and listening is a work of will. And I always thought that was very cogent, because there's a really big difference between the two.
Could you say that again?
hearing is letting it happen, the conversation. Listening is a work of will. And that's and then that goes back to the old joke we always said in sales, because I was in business development, in advertising for 20 years. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, act accordingly, right?
That's beautiful. I happen to, in this app that I use daily for meditation, a guy named Sam Harris, he introduced a poet that I didn't know of. And I like poetry, but I don't keep up on all of it. And the poet is an Irish guy named David White, and he's living in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And Sam Harris simply offered that you might want to check this out. And as Sam Harris would, he gave eloquent reasons for why. So I listened to, and one of them was his voice. I listened to David White do a couple of readings and reflections on the reading. And I've never heard anything like it. And it has to do with his repetition of the poems themselves in a way that allows you to hear it and listen to it and reflect on it, unlike a regular reading.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard to describe until you experience David White reading to you.
A really good friend of mine, Brian Collins, who has Collins Design Agency, went on one of David White's West Coast of Ireland tours, which I think was a week with him doing readings and stuff. And yeah, I think it's Condolences. Is that one of his books?
I don't know. I haven't looked into all his books. I think one that he mentioned at the end of his reading was Meditations. So maybe there is another one, but yeah, it's
I was going to play your game because, and it's funny that you said that, because before you said what you said, I picked up this book, which is Padraig O'Tuama, an Irish poet, oddly. He was one of the people, I saw him at a salon. One of the things just struck me is that he listens so well. I mean, he was there to read poetry, but it was a salon, so his presence and his total submission to whatever people asked. It was amazing how powerful it was. I have never seen it, and I go to a lot of sort of salons and things like that. He just engaged the people there in a way, and because he totally listened and was totally there and present. And it smacked me across the face as to how rarely you see that, and how compelling it is when you do. I can't do it. I don't know what it was just a magical, to get back to some of this stuff. It's like, I don't even know what part of me was reacting to that, but it had such a profound effect on me. I've never seen it before, but it was entirely his ability to listen that gave me that feeling.
It makes it all the more remarkable when a celebrity has that power. And I think of Keanu Reeves that way.
Yeah.
In any interview with him, he dares to have a period of silence before he answers a question.
Mm-hmm.
But then he follows it up with the word "whoa."
Yeah, it's almost like, there's a wonderment about his own answer.
That's just a little bit of bringing us back down to earth, as I say that I am going to draw the ridiculously awesome conversation to a close because I'm just a bad person. Why would I do that? Such an awful person I am. But I'm going to say, for people watching on Facebook or YouTube after the fact, this is why I do Corona TV. It's as simple as that. This after show and reconnecting with people like William, and you can just basically see it for yourself. And William, I'm gonna close this down on Facebook, but I'm just gonna tell people on Facebook, you're very welcome to come every day until eventually I charge, because I realize Love of Love's not going to pay the mortgage anytime soon. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Goodbye, everybody. That's just stopping the stream on Facebook. Now I'm going to stop the recording in a minute here. There's too many things going on in my pea brain. Forget about listening. I don't even have time to listen. William, you are welcome to come back to this after show every single day.
I'll come back when I can.
Before things get busy again. I mean, hopefully they'll be very busy, but we'll find the time for these kinds of meaningful connections and dialogues. And
let's do that. I love connecting. Thank you for your hospitality, your willingness to.
Thank you for look at me as I show off my gifts from you.
That's okay.
We didn't even tell people how they can buy this stuff. I mean, I'm a terrible host. I'm gonna have to like.
I don't do it. Look.
Or anything like how do they like the digital book? I mean, you wrote a digital book. They should know. In fact, I tell you what I'll do on Monday. On Monday, just send me a couple of links or whatever, and I'll start off the show by just telling people to go back, listen to today.
If they're curious, they'll find it. If they're not curious, they don't deserve it.
Nice, I love that. Take that one to the bank. Well, guys, have a wonderful weekend, and let me just stop the recording.